Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 86 of the Home Games Podcast. I'm Yazeed, and this is Joseph.
Hello, I'm Joseph, and today is July 18th, 2021. I was going to say 2021. It's a rough day for us. Yeah. We're going to be talking about why I'm a bad product manager. I had this realization today that I've been terrible at managing everything I've been working on. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about Homedome and our game publishing stuff and the current state of that, which is related to me being a terrible product manager. And then Yazeed is going to talk about TypeScriptification, or the conversion of Squish stuff to TypeScript.
That's right. Do you want to go first or want me to go first?
I have quite a bit, so I'll try to split it up into two. So I'll do like me and then you, then back to me.
Okay.
So yeah, first I'll just talk about me being a bad product manager. And it's something that I said months ago of this realization that I'm a bad product manager because I do this like scope creep constantly where I'll tell myself this system, this component, this whatever needs to do this, nothing more. But it needs to do this because I need to build this other system that depends on this. And then I'll be writing this and I'll say, well, one day this will need to do this, 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 and this. And so, okay, even if I don't build it all right now, I should start thinking about it and start writing stuff with that in mind. But when I start writing stuff with that in mind, I basically start writing it because I'm building parameters that they're not there yet, bro, but like they're there. And so, it's my own fault for just being like too, I guess, excited about whatever stuff and being, just trying to do everything. So again, this morning I had to look at what I was doing with Homedome and say, no, it's not doing these things that I'm planning right now. We're not going to do that until next year. And some other stuff with like the game discovery or discoverability stuff from the home game side of like, basically playing published games, changing that up a little bit too, same kind of a thing. Like we need to just cut stuff because at a certain point I just have all these things that I haven't deployed still. And if you just look at GitHub, it looks like we abandoned this, and it's like I hate that feeling so much, and it puts more pressure on me. Like I put more pressure on myself. To just like do something, and so I'll like make another repo because it's like, oh well, the locker. I need to have a repo for the locker. Well, I might as well have a little proof of concept for the locker. It's like, and it's just me being stupid because I just want to put something out. All this is to say, I'm cutting some shit. We'll talk about it, but
some stuff is about to hit the cutting room floor.
Yeah, so I guess in a related thing to that, just 2021 end goals. I have a bullet point list. It's pretty simple. We need to have the ability to publish assets where you have your images and all this kind of stuff for your games. That's already done. I just don't have it's not deployed, but it's built. So that's one thing. The other thing is the self-service game publishing, which is full end-to-end, the stuff I've been working on, where someone can put up their code on GitHub, submit it through Home Games, and have it be available through Home Games, playable in Home Games, all that kind of stuff. Close to done, but whatever. That's just a goal by the end of this year. This third one is the ability for Home Games clients to access published games by ID. That's what this bullet point says, but that's just basically the cut version of playing published games, because before I was saying we need to have a dashboard where you can search and you can list and filter, and you can find games by author, and it's like, we should do that, we need that. But right now we have none of that, and so instead of trying to build all of that, let's build the half step. And so published games by ID is the system that I was talking about, where basically once a game is automatically approved and kind of pseudo published before it's human reviewed, it's accessible and playable by ID. So if you have the game ID that you made, you can share it with a friend. They can play the game that you made, but you can't like list it. And so since that's a feature that we were already building, I just think that's a good stopping point. And we wouldn't have to build any of that discoverability UI. So that's a goal for the end of this year. The next one is more stable HTTPS. The certifier basically as though it works when I'm working on it, and when I step away from it, it stops working. So that it's just a super fragile system the way that it is now for a lot of reasons. But that needs to be essentially redone. And then this kind of related to this next one, which is a less embarrassing code base, which it's hard to quantify like what less embarrassing means or like actually make that a goal. But I think we both know what it means. Just make this shit better. which is kind of going to go into your TypeScript stuff that you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And I have two more, but these are kind of maybe different. I don't know. Just basic documentation again. Like, with all this new shit that we've built since our last round of documentation, we just need a clean redo of that, but a simple version, nothing too deep because it'll still change. And then Pico de Gallo demos. I want to be able to say, hey, here's a game. You can demo it on a public Pico de Gallo instance. You don't need to run home games to play a home game if you want to just see what it's about. I think that's super important. But the more I think about that, the more it sounds like what I said before, which is the ability for home games clients to access published games by ID. If home games can do that, Pico de Gallo can do that. There's no separate functionality really. So yeah, that's 2021 end goal. So there was some cuts in there that I might not have mentioned or whatever that weren't super obvious, but that's a stripped back version of everything I've been planning to do and working on, and that seems realistic, I think, at least at this point.
Right on.
Yeah.
I have I guess a question on like implementation. I guess a while ago you told me that. I remember if you said this or a coworker at the time said this, but like the idea of you have to write something 3 times before like the third time is right.
Yeah, my coworker told me that.
Yeah, is that something that you still like think is right, or do you think that that's not 100% accurate for home games?
I don't think it's like a real rule. It's kind of just one of those jokes. It's kind of like saying like, oh, it's always in the last place you look. It's kind of just some way of. It's just some way of acknowledging that like no one knows what the fuck they're doing. In a way, because needing to rewrite something 3 times is really just saying when you're building a new idea, you have this thing of what you think the idea is going to be, and it's probably wrong, so you build a wrong version of that. You think you have a clearer version, so you kind of iterate, and then you kind of go from there, and typically 3 is like a good number, but it's not like once we hit 3 we can never rewrite any component, or we have something that we think is really great on revision 2. It's just like, no, there's something wrong with this.
Yeah, because I remember in college also, I don't remember who, but it was like a professor who said you had to ask the question how like 27 times or something before you actually start writing the code. And I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
If we did that, I would never accomplish anything.
I think it's the mindset and stuff too, because I think if we had sat down at the beginning of this project and said, what are we what's our real end goal, not just what are you doing right now and what's the current like fun experiment and what do you think it can do. It's like, what is your end goal? And is it going to make money? How is it going to make money? When is it going to make money? That kind of stuff. Then at that point you have more of an investment or whatever. Like if this was the only thing we were doing and we didn't have jobs and all that kind of stuff, we would be forced to look at it like that and say, I'm going to build a game publishing service. And that's expensive. It's a lot of time. It's going to require some more resources in our AWS bill. It's a lot. So if we were a real business and this were more of a serious thing from the get-go, we would have had to say, well, why? Then you say, well, we want to publish games. Well, why? Because that's what the core of this is like a sharing of games thing. Why? You can keep going from there, and then you really flesh out like what am I doing? Because I don't want to waste resources. But I think for me, and I think for you, but the wasting resources part is kind of like the fun. It's the fuck around, because you don't have to worry so much about bringing in money from it. It's just, let's see if we can do this, and yeah, we can. So now that we're back, I had to cut that part out because anyway, what I was going to say is it's hard to balance that with having real goals, because obviously we need to have real goals or else we're just messing around endlessly. But I think that's been the past year basically is at least from my perspective, just building out these things I didn't know that we needed and realizing how much more complicated all of this stuff is and how it could become these other things that I didn't really think about before. And that was, we learned that through fucking around. So I don't see it as a negative.
Yeah. I mean, we're basically an R&D team.
Yeah, which is cool. It's like, and I don't know. I just like the freedom of it. I read the book Masters of Doom recently, and it just talked about how John Carmack and John Romero like really just kind of freestyled their way with just their kind of their ideas and what they wanted to do. They kind of freestyled their way into like this crazy shit that was super cool. And they kind of just figured it out along the way. So it's not that we're anyway comparable to those dudes, but
it's like pioneers in tech and like video games. But yeah,
yeah. But I guess it's kind of proof that you don't really need to go in and say like this needs to be this, and we're gonna do this because whatever. You can kind of just do what you think you need to do, and then you kind of figure it out along the way.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. But yeah, I do see your point on trying to like tone it down a little bit.
You mean in terms of scope?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like this past couple weeks has been busy for me outside of all this stuff. And so, you have times when you're just like, okay, time to sit down on my one day to like go super in depth on this one part. Do I need to even be doing like, what is this really going to give us having this year? And if you think about that question, a lot of the stuff goes away. Yeah,
I agree.
Do I need this sortable table component to have a really nice extendable styling framework that I can build around it? It's like, yeah, that'd be really nice, but I'm not building that shit right now.
I think you might need to build that right now. I saw that UI. I'm joking.
Yeah, just before this, I was showing Yazeed some of my Homedome stuff in the Home Games website, and Homedome is just a game approval service for people unfamiliar. So, yeah, the tables that all that data is being rendered in look like shit, but I have to tell myself that it's not that important right now because it's not. Yeah, you can have really nice styles on tables with no data, and no one will use them still.
That's true.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. On my side of things, I after last episode, I really kind of liked the idea of starting to convert stuff over to TypeScript because I kind of
hate my code.
I don't hate you. No, I wasn't going to say about your code yet. Honestly, like I don't like typed languages. Just like me personally, I don't like typing my variables. I like just.
How do you get the code in if you don't type it?
I use Google Copilot or GitHub Copilot or whatever it's called now. I use that and just a bunch of enter keys. Just slam the enter key and whatever it writes. I'm like, this is the product I guess we're selling. I don't like typed languages, strictly typed languages, strongly typed languages. Just as a person, I think they're verbose, and I don't enjoy writing them. But
not necessarily. It doesn't have to be verbose just because it's typed. But I kind of see what you're saying.
The only language I know that's not verbose that is typed that I know of is like assembly, because it's the same amount of code regardless of whatever you're using.
You should look into Kotlin. It's basically Java but good.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Yeah, I've never seen Kotlin. I just remember Java and it just being like, oh, you want a main function, public setting void, main string brackets args, curly brace, son of a... And I'm like, I don't want to have to like memorize like a little like chant, a little like sorcerer spell to like get my code to run. No, anyway, I don't really like typed languages, but I do think that there's like a real power in TypeScript when it comes to like figuring out what's going on in your code. So I started the conversion on Squish to being TypeScript. I'm almost done. I have 2 files left to do. The big file, which is Squish.js, and then the game node class, not the internal game node class, but just the game node class. So those 2 things I need to do, finish. And then I thought about, while I'm in here, I might as well just write, do not look at me and say Yazeed's doing scope creep. I was like, I should write unit tests for everything in Squish anyway, just because I can now, because I actually understand what Squish is doing from like top to bottom. And then I was also like, it'd be kind of sick if our little like unit tester also gave code coverage, wouldn't it?
That's definitely scope creep.
But what if you give code coverage?
Well, it depends. If you want to work on that, that sounds cool. It sounds like that would be cutting into your game goals or whatever. Honestly, if you wanna, I think I need to take a break from making games. First of all, making games has never been something I really do enjoy doing. But I was like, okay, well, if Joseph's gonna like build everything, then I don't know what I would do to like add to this aside from making games. But now I can actually do something.
So I'm like, I want to make this TypeScript and unit tested, and then code coverage, and then I'll go back to make my game. Because the game I really want to make, like all the other games are like, oh, like I'll make this game because it'll like add on to like our stuff. The game I really want to make is the hide and seek game though, but we can't even do that yet.
Yeah, it's true. We can't do that yet. But I would say, since we're building this other system of how to get games into everything and basically a V1 of the real version of how this stuff is going to be, we could probably hold off on games until after that's done to go into that with kind of a fresh thing and not trying to build the train track while we're on the train or whatever. So yeah, we can hold off on that stuff. I totally get it. But if you also want to work on some of this stuff with me, I mean, I just always kind of assumed that you wouldn't want to because it was all crazy Joseph code. So, it's mostly shit, but you've been doing that for the past week with Squish, and we kind of breezed over it, but you said that you actually understand Squish now, which is an accomplishment because no one else has ever looked at that stuff. So that's kind of a nice thing for us.
Yeah, I looked at it quite in depth, but the nice thing about TypeScript is it gives you everything. So one of the things that I had to do to figure it out is like I need to know what is this a string? Is this a number? Is this a function? If it is a function, what arguments does it take? What type are those arguments? What is the outcome from that function? Like I needed to know all of that stuff. So I had to like jump through like how does this get used in web? How does this get used in core? How does this get used later in Squish? Like I needed to figure out all that stuff and it's just it was eye-opening to understand entirely how Squish actually works and some of the like quirks of Squish and stuff like that.
Like what?
The fact that game node contains an internal game node which has an ID which you use most places, but when you're removing a child you use the game node's ID. You don't go into the you normally pull the ID into the game node, so that game node has like node and ID. But when you're doing the remove, for some reason, you actually look into the node's ID instead of just looking at the game node's ID. Little things like that.
Because it's like a yeah, okay. The assumption. I put in one weird side effect, and then I tried to build the other side of it pure, not knowing about the side effect, even though I know about the side effect. Which is that I set this other thing because you initialized whatever.
Yeah. And the other thing too is part of the reason why I want to write unit tests for it all is, I mean, when Joseph and I had a call because I had a. Oh, okay, it's a dog.
It's a dog outside.
Yeah, I had a question because I wasn't sure if modifying colors changed it for every game, but that turned out to not be the case.
I had a weird like, holy shit, do I know how JavaScript works when you showed me that problem, because I thought I knew the answer and I didn't, and then I did. But anyway.
Yeah, you did know the answer because JavaScript passes, this is like into the weeds. JavaScript passes arrays and objects by pointer as opposed to by value. And so you can actually change the like underlying one if you don't copy it. But the way that our games work is that they all get like a cleaned version of Squish, so it doesn't fall into the other games.
They all like load the actual code on disk, not whatever modifications you've made in memory on your side, because they're all starting up new processes. So it all worked. It did. You were like, hey, this simple thing that someone can do to like totally destroy this entire system. It's like, oh shit, maybe you're right.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So like all that stuff, and part of the reason I want to write unit tests for it all is because I understand it now. If somebody else is like, I don't understand what this function does. Unit test, son. You go in there and you're like, what does this do? Is there side effects? What is the outcome from this function? That's more than just like the TypeScript fied version. That I think I'm going to do. The code coverage thing is I was on a walk with my dog, and in my head I was like, how do they calculate code coverage? Yeah. And I was like, well, I have my own unit testing thingy. What if I wrote code coverage into that unit testing thingy? And I was like, I'd have to do research, but I could do it. Yeah. And then you could be like, Squish.js is 100% unit tested code coverage.
There must be frameworks for that, but I guess it'd be cool to write your own.
There is frameworks for it. We didn't use a framework to do the unit tests.
Yeah.
So if we don't have to, I could write my own code coverage.
It just sounds like tapping into the guts of something that we're not familiar with, and trying to link that back out to something like with a text analysis tool.
Yeah. Listen, somebody has to have something about it, like a Stack Overflow post or like a Medium article.
Yeah, it's one of those, and they're just like, holy shit, why are you trying this? Use a framework.
Yeah. No, I imagine somewhere in some university they're like, make a code coverage tool as like an assignment.
That sounds like a really hard thing to build. I don't know. That sounds hard to build.
It does.
Especially because you're relying on it for your testing. And
well, that's why you write your unit tests against your code coverage.
You're unit testing your unit tests?
You unit test your unit tester.
Yeah, nice.
And you run your code coverage tool against your code coverage tool. That's how you know if it's right or not.
I guess.
Or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. That part's optional. It's optional. Everything else, I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish. Yeah. Right? Like the Squish.js, I think should be on TypeScript, and then unit tested completely. And then I was going to look at converting web over because that's the next smallest thing. And then I thought about doing core, but I'm not sure where core is going to be with all this other stuff that you've been working on. So I was going to hold off on that until it's done.
The stuff I'm working on right now is mostly outside of actual home games code. So if you want to move over core now, that'd be cool. Okay. Or, I'll make my changes. The next changes I'm going to make are just related to asset loading.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, Squish and then home games web, I think can be on TypeScript probably by next week, or not next week, by next podcast. And then core will probably take me a bit because I think there's just a lot in core. But yeah. I think moving it over to TypeScript will help a lot with people who are coming in and not sure what's going on. Because as you're writing functions the other thing about TypeScript, if you have like an IDE or I use VS Code, it'll tell you like it takes in this function, like this function, like you have like these properties on this value, and it has this kind of arguments to this function, and those arguments need to be of this type, and it'll return this type, and then you have to like make sure that your types match up with it. So it just helps you like organize your code so that you don't run into anything, especially when you don't understand, or when you don't haven't like been in and out of the like Squish.js code. I feel like it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
I will say one more thing about this. This is honestly like one of my favorite parts of working on this project with you is that you are simultaneously like probably the best software boy I know, like by far, but you're also
the dumbest man on earth.
So stupid. I don't understand. Like your code treads the line where it's like, oh yeah. You divide this by 255, then you multiply that by 0.1, and then you multiply that by the width of this thing, and then you get your outcome number. And I'm like, well, why do you divide it by 255? And you're like, oh, it's because it's an unsigned blah blah blah. It says we take 255 division. I was like, okay. But what's the 0.1 multiplier on there? Like, oh, that's just to give them more options. And I was like, how would they know? How would they know?
The 0.1 is because, so with the math that you were describing there is the calculation for border width. Mm-hmm. When you give a game node a border option, you can say like a size of 1 to whatever, but because the number is itself an unsigned 8-bit integer, the range is 0 to 255. So I thought instead of just giving 0 to 100, you can kind of give more options. So someone can say, for example, I don't know, 3, and then that would be like 3 over 255, which is whatever that percentage is, as opposed to just whatever. Anyway, that was the thinking. And then that 0.1 is like, okay, well, once you calculate some sort of value for the border, which is like a function of the width of the screen, then you multiply it by 0.1 because you don't want the border to be more than, 10% of the width of the screen, like reasonably. So that there's rules and there's reasoning for it, but the actual code looks like fucking madman scribbling.
Yeah, it really is. It really cracks me up because like other places too, you build a string, but you don't use string interpolation.
Yeah.
It's like Java where you're like string plus value plus string plus value plus string. And I was reading that and I was like, Just is so smart for having to figure this out. So dumb for doing it the easy way, though.
The string interpolation stuff is relatively new in JS. Like you used to have to do the concatenation just like Java. So that's what I've always done. Kind of like for the longest time I was using var, even though const and let were like natively supported in the browsers and stuff. I was still using var because, I don't know. I just used to it, but whatever. My code sucks. I get it.
It doesn't suck. It really is like the scribblings of a crazed Genius.
Well, what I was gonna suggest, and thank you for the kind of half compliments, but I was gonna suggest is
they're full compliments, but you are very dumb.
I'm the dumbest man on earth. But I was gonna suggest, because you're getting familiarity with these things, you're kind of like studying them in a way that I don't think anyone else has, or will, hopefully. So I think you're in a unique position to write documentation. And I know documentation's fucking boring.
Yeah.
And so I'm not asking you to write everything. I would ask you to write down some sort of bullet points just while you're going along the way of what is hard, what's important, like the things that you just mentioned to me. Because if you do that, I can go through and take your thing as a base and then just add to it. The things that you think are important, and I'll just add to it. And I think if we both have that documentation written at the end of this year, when we have something that we're both kind of happy with, that's better than me documenting everything the way I understand it. And, maybe that's hard for people to get into or whatever. So
yeah. I can edit too. The one nice thing about TypeScript is that because I have to define like what all the classes are already, I can pull that out and be like, this is the class game node. This is the like values it contains in their type. Here's what they're used for. And that's like not that hard to like add on. And it's like, oh, what is like game node used for? That's like the node. Like this is like the like lowest, it's like the simplest component to making a game. Basically,
the
atomic unit of home games is the game node.
My mentor at one of my jobs a few years ago said one of my system designs was too complicated because I didn't have a clear idea of my atomic unit. I remembered that for the longest time because it sounds like some smart guy shit, but when I thought about it, he was right. So I was like, damn,
it was some smart guy shit, and he was right.
Yeah. Well, smart guy shit can't be right because it's smart guy shit. It's like, that's like over there.
Yeah.
But he was actually right. So
I'm gonna start to use that
atomic unit.
Well, I'm gonna start to use that line though.
Oh.
Because I have to review pull requests, code requests. I'm gonna start to do that. Do that to you too.
Someone's like, change CSS style from red to blue, and you're just like, I have some comments here. You haven't really defined
your atomic unit. Is it red? Is it blue? What's going on here?
Is this about color or is this about the flow?
Is this about color or your relationship with your coworkers? I don't know. It's very interesting having gone through all of Squish.js before, because I've used it to make stuff, but I honestly didn't really know what was going on. And opening up the squish.js file, I was like, maybe it's best that I don't know what's going on. No. I'm gonna go through that one, TypeScript it, maybe do a little bit of cleanup, because I think there's some math in there that could probably be simplified, so I'll probably do that. And
or at the very least documented. At the very least documented the math. Like you mentioned before, where it was
the border stuff.
Yeah, but there was another one a few weeks ago where, my math was just super fucked and confusing, but it somehow worked. I think it was maybe on the click, like when you can click. Anyway, it was something like that. But my math was totally incomprehensible, and the only reason I knew it worked is because I ran it and it worked. So that stuff is the worst of it.
It's definitely funny to me, because I know how you write your code, and when I read your code, I'm like, I know how Joseph was feeling when he wrote this code. So that's where I'm at, and I think that the documentation, the TypeScript stuff, the unit testing stuff that comes out of it will be good. I am still curious how code coverage is actually calculated. I might just read an article on it and then not implement it. Or maybe I'll implement it. You never know. It's a grab bag, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was one particular time when I was using JUnit, the testing library on Java, and then I forget what it was for code coverage, but it was some other library or framework or whatever. And I had unit tests that I know execute this line. You can even add a print, and it'll put that line into the console in the output, but the code coverage will say it never executed those during the tests. And so it was like, holy shit, there's a problem with the code, the line coverage. Mm-hmm. And if I don't want to fix that. I don't want to be responsible for that. I just want to use it and have it always work and be good. You know? I don't know. It sounds hard.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how bad it is. Because the other thing, too, is I think that when I do that, I'll probably have to pull out the code, the unit testing stuff that we have and probably put that in like a separate package. So I'll probably have to do that if I'm going to add that in. Because I'm pretty sure whatever it is either going to be one absolutely just like train wreck of one JavaScript file or it's going to be many files, which is probably the way to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'll see how that goes. It reminds me of when we were in compilers and that one guy was like, I'm going to write my compiler in Node.js. And I was like, that man's a madman. I feel like that's what I'm about to open up and be like, this isn't gonna work. Or like, oh, I understand how Jess does this, but I'm not about to.
Well, it'll still be cool to figure out how the other stuff works to at least better understand something when we do choose one instead of just whatever's popular. So yeah, like I said earlier, fucking around is always valuable. I think, well, not always, to a point.
I don't think adding code coverage is gonna be valuable, but I'll do it anyway, or not.
I mean it's like your holistic approach to living life or whatever. When I go for a hike, I learn how to be a better lover or whatever. Your shit. Or learning how to build a code coverage tool helped me pick a code coverage tool, for example. Or there's something to it.
Yeah, or write your own. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then we have our own. And then we replace all of the JavaScript unit testers with our unit tester, and that's our way in. That's like actually the way in. That's how home games becomes popular, is that people start using our unit testing stuff, and then they're like, oh wait, they have other stuff too. Oh, what's this? A way to make and play games with your friends using JavaScript? Yeah, I'm into that. And then they do, and then we become billionaires.
Yeah.
And we go to the moon. We're the first billionaires to the moon. I don't know. This is my fan fiction.
I don't think we have a lot of time to be the first billionaires to the moon. There's already an ongoing competition there, so we're well behind.
No, we're going to really take off. We're going to be like a skyrocket type deal,
I kind of freak out sometimes where I know every log generated in our system. If I go into CloudWatch, I can see every ETS log, and everything is pretty much me. Every action is me making requests, doing tests, and making changes and stuff, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. I test in prod. I don't have a test environment for a lot of this stuff except for the website. So I just test in prod. Don't give a shit. But one day, if people started using this, I would freak out. I wouldn't know what to do. So maybe one day.
I just set up like a QA in a staging environment.
Yeah, well, I would need to. It's on my list of stuff to do one day. Is have actual different environments. At the very least, a test and a prod as opposed to just what I'm doing now. But yeah. Anyway, I don't even know why I mentioned that, but it's a fact.
Yeah. I think it's fun.
Okay, so my last thing, well, not my last thing. I had a few things, but I wanted to give an update on Homedome and the publishing stuff I've been working on. Like I mentioned, I had all these ideas for what I wanted to do, and using a tool to see what network requests something makes, what files it accesses, and all this kind of stuff, to verify in an automatic way if something is not a virus for when someone's trying to publish a game through Home Games, and so. Basically, I'm not doing the hard version of that. I'm doing a very basic report on what this thing is and does when I'm calling it poke, the step in the workflow is just a poke, where I have the code. Okay, it has an index.js. Okay, I can require this index, whatever module it exports from this index.js, use it in this thing, and then call some methods that I know should be there, some Home Games methods. Do they exist? Yes. Okay, call them. Do they fail? And do they make requests? Do they access the file system? That's it. That's the basic that I'm going to do, and I have most of that working right now. Mm-hmm. And so once it passes that poke, it does a more kind of in-depth test, or it will do kind of an in-depth test. And so I guess one of the questions that I have is, what are those tests? Mm-hmm. We can verify that a game has a render method. We can verify that if it uses assets, it's only using assets through Home Games assets, not just random URLs. Mm-hmm. And we can do these kinds of things. But what else?
I mean, accessing the file system is up there probably.
Well, I mean, verifying it does not access the file system during these poke tests.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But what are the poke tests besides, hey, do you have a thing called render? Does it give me a thing back that I can unsquish and then squish again and have it be valid? How much do I have to check?
That's a good question. I think as long as the render like, I think if you call the functions that home games will always call, right, that's good enough, because there's always going to be a way for somebody to sneak something in, like, oh, if actually you're like in the game and you type in like WASD in that order at this time frame, then this function is going to fire, and that would get them around most automated testing, but wouldn't get them around somebody like actually like looking at their code. So I think the initial thing is like, just like simply like, if we call your stuff, is it bad? Is it like questionable what you're doing? Does it put up like yellow flags for us? And then when we review it later, that's when we actually have to like look at it and be like, okay, like under these specific conditions, you are gonna get to be able to like do something that's not ideal. And then like as we find those, maybe we can add them into home games, or the Homedome, sorry, so that Homedome checks against those things. That way, like, right, because we have like an infinite set, but if we start to like shrink that set by the things that people already like tried to do, and then we're like catching up, but it's still an infinite set. But we just have more like ability to like,
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'm thinking, besides making sure that whatever your index.js file contains, that it extends the base game class, that it has a render, that it has an initialize or whatever. But that's it. We can't do anything else. Maybe a handle new player, but it could have it could just ignore that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. I think you should try to like add a new player, right? Because any game needs to have at least one player that connects to it.
But that's what I'm saying. It doesn't need handle new player because the actual connection of the player to the game is handled below the game or above the game. It's outside of the game.
Right.
So the handle new player is just, hey, you have a new player. Do you care? They could just not. Their game could just be like an image thing. People connect and view it, but
right, but it shouldn't throw an error.
No, it shouldn't. But I'm saying we can't call it if it isn't guaranteed to be there. The only thing that's guaranteed that needs to be there is a render.
Interesting. What would be a game that doesn't need to know that a new player joined?
Well, like I said, if you have a game that's just an image, if you have a game that it doesn't require interaction, or even if you have interaction, it could be anonymized where you just have a handle new click and you get the player object in that callback of like, hey, this is the person that clicked your shit. But the game session keeps all that player info. The game just, it just gets a notification when something changes, but the actual state is managed by the game session.
I see. But I guess the question I would have is like, are we spinning up the game and then calling these functions, or are we just calling those functions like unit test style?
Well, no, we would have to, if it's all instances of a game, so we'd have to start a new instance and then call render on it.
Wait, so when you call a new instance, though, you would be able to connect with a player, is what I'm trying to get at.
You can connect with a player, and that's handled by game session.
Yeah. But I mean, like, that should, as long as, like, we can do that, I think, like, basically, like, simple things, like, can we add a new player, and does that error? Can we remove a player? Does that error? Can we start your game, right? Can we render does your render function work? Like, what do those things do?
With the player thing, though, like, you have a game. The system guarantees that a player can connect to your game through game session. Your game could not have a handle new player or handle player disconnect. So we couldn't call them.
Well, I mean, wait. Couldn't you call them on like the spun up instance though?
No, because the game, if you're talking about
like not the function definite, not like the function that's defined in the game, but I mean like the one that home games has. Like, couldn't we use like that pipeline and actually be like, okay, like we're gonna add a player. If that game has a way, like has any additional work on adding a new player, we're gonna see that one because we're gonna run a new player through the gauntlet, and we're gonna remove a player out of that gauntlet too. So like we literally like run through like it's not like a unit test, but more like an end to end or integration test where you're like, okay, put a new player in, take that player out, put another one in, render the game. Can all those things work? Can we close the game afterwards? What are all of the things that happen? Like, do we access the file system? Do we make an HTTPS request? And then any of those flags that come up, we're like, okay. But then when we review it more in depth. Then we add more like criteria to it. Like if somebody added, I don't know, something they render or like a non-player input or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. That totally makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So if they have a handle new player or if they don't, it doesn't matter because our system, like I was saying, will take that connection from the game session and then the game will do what it does. And we just need to make sure that it gives us back something that is a game. That makes total sense. I think one thing we can do there is make sure that, like, we get this array of data back, this like binary array for something to render, but we need to also iterate through that and make sure that it's all valid. Which we can do with unsquish. So that sounds like a good idea. I didn't think about like doing an actual full end-to-end test, so that's smart. There's a little bit of work obviously I need to do there, but I think the Homedome as I think it needs to be will be done probably this week, and I'll deploy it next week. So that's just the Homedome stuff now.
Right, that's super cool. Yeah, I don't know. Just to me, like, Homedome is so black box-y, where it's almost impossible for us to track down everything that somebody could do. That I think we just have to like be kind of generic with it, and then be more like specific once we find people are trying to sneak garbage through.
Yeah, it makes me think about so we talk about publishing games and having no personal attitude that can influence the approval, because the only rule is that you can't break the law. And we have to approve your game if you're not breaking the law and you're not doing what we define as weird shit, which is just these network requests, like, which I'm sure is breaking the law, trying to like fucking, I don't know anything about the law, but whatever, in some sort of way. Trying to pull people's sensitive data off of their machine and send it to your thing probably is defined as malware in some sort of way. So I don't know, but there will be a time when someone submits, or there could be a time when someone submits code that is just so complex, and they have everything set up into so like different modules and files, and it's so hard to read and understand that a human being couldn't reasonably read it to understand how it's not breaking these rules. So then what? Like, how do we define that of like your code is so bad?
Oh my god. Well, okay. Let's not use the term bad, right? Because there is like purposeful obfuscation, which is bad if you're just a regular human being, but is good if you're trying to purposely obfuscate your code, right? I think in that case, somebody's just gonna have to take the L and is just gonna have to like spin up a VM or an EC2 instance and just start plugging away at it and see if they can do something that they're not supposed to be able to do, basically.
But if I'm trying to get my book published through you, and you have to make sure that there's no secret nuclear launch codes in your book. Not that I'm making sure it's good, but just that there's no certain data in the book that can't be in there. And you knowing that, giving me the book, but all the pages are out of order, I have a obligation to tell you to go fuck yourself. Right?
I mean, listen, I think it's cool to just message that person and being like, why are you doing this? But also, I feel like we're not playing the role of editor, right? We're not playing the role of editor. We're not even playing the role of moderator. We're literally playing the role of, I don't want to get in legal trouble. So I think we're obligated, if somebody sends us something, if we can't get back to them, or even if we can't get back to them, to just try to get their like review, or like figure out what is going on with this. And we don't necessarily have to read the code, but if we're just play the game in like a normal sense, maybe that will be enough. I'm not sure.
But there's such a burden on the person to test that, where it's like, okay, the game, I spin it up and it's a screen, and maybe it is the world's greatest game. Maybe it's like Frog Fractions, if you're familiar with Frog Fractions, where it starts out and it's a very basic math game that seems like it's for kids, and eventually it progresses to something way beyond that, and it's like a text-based adventure, and it's like hilarious, and it's an action game, and it's not it's like a whole bunch of stuff, and it progresses way beyond what the original thing is. The whole game is kind of like an Easter egg. to the point where there was a whole meme about Frog Fractions 2 about finding it because it could be hidden in some other game somewhere. My point is that you can have something like that, and it's on me then to discover it while I'm trying to just do what is essentially a manual human check job thing that shouldn't require like art analysis. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same time, it's like if they are making Frog Fractions 2, which I didn't even know existed until right now, right? If they really were doing that, and we messaged them and we're like, listen, your game is very complicated. It is going to take us some time to get through it all. They need to either be like, we'll sit down with you and like help you walk through it, or they could be like, okay, that's fine, or they just don't respond. But I'm of the opinion that we should take any submission as a legitimate submission.
If I'm verifying your code to make sure that you didn't do anything wrong, you can't be on the investigation. You can't help me find out what's wrong with your code.
Oh, that is true. If you're the murder suspect, you can't. Okay, fair enough.
Not that you have to view them as like the enemy or whatever, but in that thing, you're trying to prove something. I'm just saying there's a line, and I don't think I even know if it'll ever happen reasonably because I don't really see it happening, but it's just something to think about where, what if it's just not realistic for someone to do what is ultimately just supposed to be like a validation check that something is good to go and not analyze the content. How do we actually set that up for scalability?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the answer to that would just be hiring interns.
Well, even then you can have people, but you need to have a consistent bar for those people. And how do you check in to make sure that people aren't being subjective? How do you make sure that every decision that someone made was by the books? Like you know what I mean? You can't.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, unless you want to review all of them, or me and you to review all of them, if like say Home Games had like 1 million submissions in, there's no way that you and I can review 1 million submissions in a reasonable time frame before another set of 1 million submissions comes in.
Well,
I think that number is pretty low, honestly. I think if 20 submissions came in one day and then 20 submissions came in the next day, we would be like months out from being able to say like, okay, all of our backlog of games that need to be published is cleared.
That's why I'm saying that this can't be something like, basically, to be a programmer about it, the validation check on a human level should be constant time. It should not increase linearly. It should not be an O of N operation. It should be an O of 1.
It has to be O N. It can't be constant.
But
if you time box somebody QAing, right? Not QAing, but like analyzing Frog Fractions 2, or let's say a game that I actually know, right? If somebody was like, okay, we're gonna like look over Tetris to see if there's anything bad with Tetris, how long would it take someone to go through Tetris?
Well, but I don't think anyone needs to play the game. It'll help someone, whatever, but ultimately someone needs to say, does this code do anything bad? Mm-hmm. I can figure that out by reading code and not playing the game, but if the code is written so poorly that I start to think that I should just run it and try to basically debug this shit myself, that's when you have the obligation to say, no, I'm not reading this because you've made it so hard for me to figure out what you're doing here. So I have to say, like, fuck you.
Okay, but isn't it more subjective to say it's hard to read this versus saying, okay, we look through it and it's legally good to go?
That's so then you can have there's no answer here.
Unless what you're saying is there's like an elevated stack where like some schmo is like reviewing all of these, and when they get one that's too hard, they're like, okay, up the line until it gets to like you and or me, and then we're like, okay, all right, something is way weird with this game. Like, I'm not reading 7,700 lines of code.
7,700 doesn't seem like that bad.
No, I mean, that isn't bad. I if it's poorly lined up, it could be. What if there was 7,700 files? Also, yeah. Well,
obviously, this is one of those things. It's kind of like scope creep in a way where we're thinking about problems that are so beyond our current state that it's fun to think about, but ultimately we don't need answers on them yet because it probably would be so rare that it wouldn't be a thing for us to worry about right now. So like for the right now, fuck it, whatever.
Yeah,
it's probably fine. But definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is. That's what I was saying. Like a Homedome, I think has to be pretty generic, and then the specificity it gains is through use.
Homedome is only the automatic part of this. Homedome is only up to everything up to the part where a human being has to say, does the code do weird shit that only I would know if it's weird shit, because a computer can't know all the weird shit. So Homedome, obviously, it needs to be whatever. It needs to become a lot of things, but Homedome
machine learning for Homedome, and then we take that code and then we
and we combine that with the GitHub autopilot, and then there's an adversarial thing.
Yeah, or you can just have a home games home, I don't know, home AI or whatever.
Home bro.
I don't know. I don't have a name for it yet. Give me a bit.
I like home bro.
Home bro.
It's like homebrew.
Helps write games for home games.
Anyway, just briefly. Also, I redid the database for all the Homedome stuff because my old data model was super ass. So I have this thing now where essentially when someone tries to publish a game, it creates this request object in the database, and it's a record of your request, which has a state. So like submitted, all that kind of stuff as you would expect going through a workflow. But I thought of this thing because typically what you see in a workflow like that is that every step changes the state. So one step kind of corresponds to one value in this enumeration, whatever thing of possible states. And I think I don't like that because it makes me feel like every event needs to trigger a new state, and ultimately you get like 3 sub-states of submitted, where it's like submitted downloading, submitted loading JavaScript or whatever the hell, but you have sub-states of ultimately it's submitted. Like if you want to know more, there's something else that you can do, which I think is what I have here, which is events. So while it's going through this workflow, events happen. The download state happens, or like the download event happens, the poking event happens, the testing, the integration test event happens. These things can change state, but they aren't inherently tied to state. The actual event itself and the state are not necessarily tied. The thing that does them can do them both, At least that's the way I think of it. Anyway, I have this thing which I had just showed you earlier before we started recording. But yeah, where you have this website, where you have the website and you can say, these are my games, these are my like publish requests, and then I can click into a publish request and see the events for it. So I can see at what point it failed and why and all that kind of stuff, or succeeded, that kind of thing. But yeah, pretty happy with the database now. It's not confusing and shitty. I mean, it kind of is, but in a way that NoSQL is. Not like it's my fault. It's just because...
Or just a non-relational databases, so it's going to be a little...
Yeah, where it's like my sort key here is actually a hash of these other 3 fields, because that's my way of getting constant retrieval time for a given request. If I know that a request has been made before for a certain commit of code, I can say like, hey, you've tried to submit this build before over here and it failed, so you can't just keep doing this over and over and over again. You can retry if it fails for like a retryable reason, but if it's, you know what I mean? So in order to get that kind of a thing, you have to say, well, here's the source type, which is GitHub right now, but it could also be like GitLab or whatever, some other sort of thing in the future. And then there's the repo, the name, the owner, the commit hash. All these things, like as strings, are concatenated and then hashed using a certain algorithm, and then that's used as the sort key to say like, hey, does that exist? As opposed to needing to query the actual database, you could just do constant retrieval. It's like weird shit like that, but I like it. So anyway, yeah, that was one of the steps I had to do for Homedome this week. Pretty happy with it. And yeah, I just need to finish up the good state of Homedome approval. Right now I have it working when it fails. Like if you give me something that's written in C, or if you give me something that can't be imported as JavaScript or whatever, then that'll fail. But I just need to finish up this is a home game step. So yeah, like I said, that'll be probably in prod next weekend.
Hooray!
Yeah, but that's about it for me. It was it was a week of realization of like me hating where I am with the state of things. So yeah.
That's okay. I learned what reflection does in JavaScript, or reflect does in JavaScript, in Node.
Oh, you're talking about the internal game Node stuff. Yeah, it's actually core to how everything works.
Yeah, I didn't know how it worked before, and then when I was reading over it, I was like, Joseph's actually a genius, though.
I found that exact code, like all that shit is on Stack Overflow. I'm not that smart, but it's what Yazeed is talking about is we have this kind of listenable wrapper around objects that allow you to listen for changes on any attributes within those objects. So, for example, if you have a game node and its color is red and someone says color is now blue, then you can have listeners that subscribe basically to that object and its changes, which is the core of how all of our shit works, because that emits an event which is listened to by like the game session, which triggers a renderer, which triggers a yada yada video game logic.
yeah. But that's all. I think that's all I have too.
Awesome. Well, then that is going to do it for us. Thank you everybody for listening. As always, our music is done by our friend Tynan. He is Nightan on Bandcamp. That is Nightan, Nytan. You can find us on Twitter at homegames.io or our website homegames.io. You can send us a message using our contact form at the bottom of our website. That it's fun to use. You should use it. Twitter's also fun. You can do that too. That's all I have, I think. I don't have the notes in front of me. I just freestyled that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
No.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Or 2 weeks from now. I think you said that. 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now.
Bye.